Okay, time for a bit of a controversial video. This is about GP-5s, and this is why I wouldn't recommend GP-5 for somebody wanting a prepper type mask. So you might be thinking, how on earth could I say that? You know, the GP-5 is a great mask for preppers. But as much as the GP-5 is very cheap and it works, you have a bit of a problem if you're actually buying it as a functioning gas mask. So we'll get the mask out, and hopefully people won't hate the video and they'll actually understand the point I'm getting at in this. And the point I'm getting at is, how easily would you find filters for a GP-5? And the answer is apparently not, because despite me trying to keep linking people to filters or recommending what they search for, there's obviously your GP-5, the issue is that people are really still struggling to find non-Soviet filters for these. So, as you know, the GP-5 comes with this filter. It is literally called the GP-5 filter. What looks like RN5 in English is GP-5 in Russian. And as we know, these filters all contain asbestos. There's more and more sources coming out now. Supposedly the Finnish government has actually banned the sale of these. If you sell the mask, you have to remove the filter. So you've got this issue where you either can't buy the mask with a filter at all, or you can only buy it with an old asbestos filter. And then, do you really want to breathe through it? And if you're buying it properly to use as a prepping gas mask, you have the obviously issue that most of these filters are from the 80s or earlier. You know, you could probably get one dated 1991 at some point before the Soviet Union collapsed, but again, how good is a 20-odd year filter going to work? I'd want something more modern if I was trusting my life on it. So you've got that issue. Now people say you can use PMK filters with it, and that's true, but again, are those necessarily safe, and when were they built up to? So you do have options with this mask. If you're determined enough, yes, you can get filters for it. You can get, for example, like I've got the ABEC Polish filters that have a GOST thread on them, or you could get the modern Russian Army filters which will have a GOST thread on them that fit this mask. However, the problem being that these aren't necessarily easy to find, and they're not that, affordable. If you look for sealed NATO filters that are still in date, you can often find good deals on them. You won't on the GOST filters because they're not as widespread. Now, if you wanted a mask for prepping, you live somewhere in the former Eastern Bloc, maybe your nation still uses GOST filters, then if you still can buy easily producible GOST filters, why not? They'll work. If you're in the Western countries, like I'm in England, if people are in America, these filters get harder and harder to find at sensible prices, so it's not really a good prepping mask. Now, a lot of people make the mistake, and I've covered this in other videos, that you can put a 40mm NATO filter on this mask and it will work. It will give you the illusion that it works, but it won't actually work. The reason being is the 40mm GOST thread, if you put a NATO filter in it, you have to sort of force it in, and the actual screws are a different shape. So what ends up happening is when you have the NATO filter on it, although it appears to be airtight, and you can do an airtight pressure check and it mostly seems okay, if you're exposed to some really nasty chemical agent, you'll be inhaling it and not realising it, because you get about 1 or 2% of air coming through there. Now, it's probably possible to put a NATO filter on it, put either duct tape, some sort of tape around there, some sort of glue, some sort of epoxy, and make an airtight seal with the filter, but then that's going to make it really difficult to change filters when you need to do it. Now, the reason I'm saying this is obviously the GP-5 is cheap, and it's a nice mask to own as a collector due to its cheap price. It's, a lot of people's first gas masks. But the issue is, for prepping, it's not really practical, because of the fact that, as I said, you can't easily get filters for it. And there's so many cheap 40mm NATO masks you can get, which, even if you get the really primitive ones, would still be very similar to using a GP-5. Now, for example, there's a French M51, and I'm not necessarily going to recommend that because of, I've said before, the exhale valve is very weak, so it could break easily and compromise the mask. But there are obviously other 40mm NATO masks, say old West German M65s. If you have the right face type to fit the mask, then that's a good mask. Other than that, there's more modern examples that you can probably find for a good price. As I said in the other day, the Israeli civilian mask is a very, very competent mask for somebody wanting one for a prepping use. But these, however, aren't, because you just simply can't get modern filters that fit them very easily. It can be done, but you're going to run your filter budget up massively, and you could spend that money better elsewhere. So for that reason, any Soviet masks I don't really recommend for preppers, unless you're in countries where the sort of GOST filter is standard. You're just going to simply be paying a lot more and wasting money you could spend on canned food, bottled water, even more filters to run with a NATO mask. So for that reason I don't recommend these. Instead go for a 40mm NATO mask and get lots of NATO filters stockpiled, or go for something like a 3M full face mask and just stockpile lots of 3M filters that are ABEC and particulate rated, and you'll be okay. But as said, this is a cool mask. I love it as a collector's piece. I don't want to bad talk the mask because it's very practical for being cheap. It's just not practical when it comes to getting new filters for it. So for that reason I can't recommend the GP-5 as a prepper's mask.